It started, as these things often do, with a whisper of magic in the mundane. A coffee shop, a Tuesday afternoon, and the way his laughter echoed just a little louder than anyone else's in the crowded space. I remember thinking, quite distinctly, as I spilled a dollop of whipped cream on my sleeve trying to covertly glance at him, that this was going to be something. My life before Mark had been a comfortable, if somewhat predictable, tapestry of early mornings fueled by lukewarm oat milk lattes, late nights spent hunched over my laptop, chasing deadlines for the digital marketing agency I worked at, and weekends a blur of brunch with my best friend, Sarah, and the occasional awkward Hinge date. It wasn't bad, not by any stretch. My apartment, a slightly too expensive one-bedroom in the trendy part of the city, was my sanctuary, filled with mismatched vintage finds and the scent of burning sage. I was 28, building my career, navigating the chaotic dance of urban living, and I thought I had a pretty good handle on things. Then Mark walked in, or rather, existed in the periphery until our eyes met over a shared appreciation for the barista's questionable taste in indie rock. He had that kind of effortless charisma that made you feel like you were the only person in the room, even when you were just one of many admiring glances. His smile was easy, his eyes a warm hazel that seemed to hold a universe of interesting stories. We talked for what felt like an hour, about everything and nothing, our favorite obscure bands, the ridiculousness of corporate jargon, our shared disdain for cilantro. He was witty, intelligent, and seemed genuinely fascinated by everything I said, which, let's be honest, is a rare and intoxicating quality in anyone, let alone someone who looked like a GQ model had just stumbled off the pages. He was an architect, he said, working on some innovative sustainable housing projects on the outskirts of the city. He spoke with passion, his hands gesturing expressively, and I found myself leaning forward, completely captivated. He paid for my coffee, naturally, and before I could even formulate a polite refusal, he had slipped his number into my hand, a small, handwritten note on a crumpled napkin that read, "Don't let the universe regret this meeting. Call me." My heart did a clumsy flip-flop, a sensation I hadn't felt since my first crush in high school. It was thrilling, terrifying, and utterly exhilarating. I walked out of that coffee shop feeling like the world had shifted on its axis, a vibrant new color bleeding into the monochrome of my routine. I spent the rest of the workday in a haze, my fingers hovering over my phone, replaying every word, every glance. Sarah, ever the pragmatist, told me to play it cool. Wait a day, Lila, she advised over our evening FaceTime call, make him wonder. But I didn't. I called him that evening, my voice a little breathless, and he picked up on the second ring, his voice warm and amused. We talked for hours, easily sliding from topic to topic, discovering more shared interests and uncanny coincidences. He felt like a missing piece I hadn't even realized was absent. This was it, I thought, this was how the great love started. It was effortless, exhilarating, and promising a future I hadn't dared to dream of. I was falling, and I didn't even mind the dizzying descent. The city lights seemed brighter, my music sounded richer, and even the relentless hum of traffic outside my window seemed to sing a sweeter tune. This was the beginning of us, and for a while, it felt like the most perfect symphony I had ever heard. Every date was an adventure, every conversation a revelation. He introduced me to hidden gems of the city, tiny hole-in-the-wall restaurants, underground jazz clubs, and art galleries I'd never known existed. He remembered obscure details I'd mentioned weeks ago, like my preference for spicy ramen or my childhood dream of visiting Kyoto, and he'd surprised me with a cooking class for homemade noodles or a book about Japanese gardens. He was attentive, charming, and seemed to anticipate my needs before I even voiced them. My friends, usually wary of my whirlwind romances, were charmed. My mother, who usually found fault with everyone I dated, even managed a rare compliment over a grainy video call. Mark was, by all accounts, perfect. Too perfect, perhaps, a tiny, almost imperceptible voice in the back of my mind whispered. But I silenced it, eager to bask in the glow of this seemingly flawless connection. This was what everyone searched for, wasn't it? The kind of love that felt like coming home, even when you hadn't realized you were lost. The first tremor in our perfect little world was so subtle, I almost missed it. It was a Sunday afternoon, hazy with the kind of lazy warmth that makes you want to stay in bed forever. We were curled up on my sofa, ostensibly watching a documentary about deep-sea creatures, but mostly just talking, our legs tangled together. I casually mentioned something about a new project at work, a big pitch we were putting together for a major client, and how stressed I was feeling about it. I was looking for a little empathy, maybe a comforting squeeze of my hand. Instead, he just hummed, his gaze still fixed on the television screen, where a bioluminescent jellyfish drifted by. "You'll be fine, Lila," he said, without looking at me. "You always are. You overthink things sometimes, you know? Just chill out." It wasn't malicious, not overtly, but it felt dismissive. Like my feelings were an inconvenience, something to be tidied away so they didn't disturb the placid surface of our afternoon. I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was just focused on the documentary. Maybe I was overthinking it. But the small sting lingered, a tiny splinter under my skin. A few weeks later, we were at a dinner party at Sarah's place. It was a lively gathering, full of familiar faces, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. I was recounting a funny anecdote from my childhood, something about a disastrous attempt at baking a cake that ended with the kitchen covered in flour and frosting. Everyone was laughing, and I was in my element, enjoying the shared amusement. Then Mark chimed in, "Oh, Lila, you always exaggerate everything." It wasn't that bad, was it? His tone was light, teasing even, but it cut through the warmth of the moment like a cold draft. The laughter faltered, and a few people looked at me, then at him, a flicker of awkwardness in their eyes. I felt a flush creep up my neck. It wasn't a big deal, I told myself. He was just being playful. But it felt like he was undermining me, chipping away at my narrative, my presence. He'd done it before, subtle little corrections or downplays of my stories, always with a charming smile that made it seem innocuous. "You know how Lila gets," he'd say, or "she tends to blow things out of proportion." I'd laugh it off, pretending it was a shared joke, but inside, a tiny seed of doubt began to sprout. Was I oversensitive? Was I dramatic? Was I, perhaps, a little too much? He seemed to think so, and his opinion, by then, had started to weigh heavily on me. He wasn't overtly critical, never screamed or yelled. His method was far more insidious, a gentle, persistent erosion of my confidence, masked as playful banter or concerned observations. He'd comment on my tendency to worry, or my impulsiveness when I made a decision without consulting him first. He'd offer unsolicited advice about my career, subtly implying that my ideas weren't quite as brilliant as I thought they were, always framing it as helping me see the bigger picture. I found myself second-guessing my instincts, toning down my natural exuberance, trying to fit myself into the more manageable, less over-the-top version of Lila that he seemed to prefer. My vibrant colors seemed to fade, replaced by softer, more muted tones. I started consulting him on every decision, big or small, from what to wear to a work event to how to respond to an email from my boss. His approval became a quiet barometer for my actions. The comfortable ease of our early days began to feel less like effortless connection and more like a carefully constructed framework, one that I was constantly adjusting myself to fit within. The splinter was still there, now a little deeper, and it throbbed with a dull ache. He had a way of making the world feel like it was just the two of us. A private club with exclusive membership. After those little moments of dismissiveness, he'd always dial up the charm, showering me with attention, gifts, and grand gestures that made me forget any lingering discomfort. It was a cycle I didn't recognize then, the subtle put-down, the resulting insecurity, followed by the overwhelming rush of affection that smoothed everything over. He called it our bubble, and he started to actively encourage its inflation. My weekly coffee date with Sarah? Can't you just meet her another day? I really wanted to spend the evening just us. My yoga class? You work so hard, babe, why don't you skip it and relax with me instead? He made it sound so sweet, so loving. He wasn't forbidding anything, just making me want to choose him over everything else. And I did. I started saying no to social invitations, rescheduling plans with friends, and even letting my personal projects slide. My apartment, once a haven of independent spirit, slowly became our shared space, with his belongings gradually outnumbering mine. His toothbrush had a permanent spot next to mine, his books lined my shelves, his scent lingered on my pillows. It felt intimate, deeply committed, but also shrinking. My world, which had once felt expansive and full of possibilities, began to contract around him. Sarah, bless her observant heart, noticed. Lila, she said one afternoon, after I'd cancelled our third consecutive brunch, are you okay? You seem distant. And I never see you anymore, unless Mark is attached to your hip. I mumbled something about being busy, about being happy, about how Mark just made me feel so secure. She narrowed her eyes, a look I knew well, a look that meant she saw something I wasn't willing to acknowledge yet. Secure is good, she replied, her voice soft but firm. But are you? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. I felt a pang of defensiveness, but also a flicker of unease. Was I still me? Or was I slowly becoming a reflection of what Mark wanted me to be? He never raised his voice, never overtly demanded anything. His control was far more subtle, a masterclass in psychological manipulation. He'd make me feel guilty for wanting alone time, or for expressing a desire that didn't align with his. I thought we were going to spend the weekend together, he'd sigh dramatically, if I mentioned plans with friends. Or, if I brought up a career ambition he didn't approve of, are you sure that's what you really want, Lila? It seems like a lot of stress for you. He knew my vulnerabilities, my anxieties, and he used them, subtly twisting them against me. My innate desire to please, to avoid conflict, made me a willing participant in my own isolation. He was my compass, my confidant, my entire world, and the thought of navigating it without him became genuinely terrifying. The love I felt for him, once so light and freeing, began to feel like a heavy cloak, warm and comforting one moment, suffocating the next. I was losing myself, piece by painful piece, but the process was so gradual, so sugar-coated, that I couldn't articulate what was happening, even to myself. The financial red flags started as faint whispers, easily dismissed. Mark always seemed to have grand ideas, a new business venture, an investment opportunity, a design competition that promised a huge payout. But actual tangible results were always just around the corner. He lived well, always insisted on picking up the tab for our dinners, and his apartment, while not as meticulously styled as mine, was in a prime location. Yet, there were inconsistencies. He'd sometimes be late on his share of our joint expenses, a shared streaming service, a weekend trip we'd planned. He'd brush it off with a laugh, architect's life, babe, sometimes the payments are slow. But don't worry, it's all coming in. He'd show me mock-ups of impressive projects, sleek designs for high-rises and luxury resorts, and I'd be genuinely impressed. He spoke of meetings with important clients, of deals about to close. But then, a few months into our relationship, a casual conversation with an acquaintance at a party, someone who worked in the same architectural circles, raised an eyebrow. Mark? Oh, yeah, he's a talent. Heard he left his last firm a bit abruptly though. Something about a disagreement over funds, I think? The comment was fleeting, forgotten by the acquaintance almost as soon as it was spoken, but it snagged in my mind. I dismissed it, of course. Gossip. Jealousy. Mark was an innovator, he probably just clashed with old-school corporate types. I mentioned it to him once, very gently. Someone mentioned you left your last job under odd circumstances? He looked at me, his hazel eyes widening in feigned surprise, then narrowing slightly. Really? Who told you that, Lila? That's ridiculous. I left because they were stifling my creativity. Trying to tie me down with their archaic processes. Some people just can't handle ambition, you know? He made me feel bad for even asking, for listening to gossip. He spun a narrative of himself as a misunderstood visionary, and I, ever the loyal partner, bought it. I lent him money once, for a temporary cash flow issue with a big project. Just until the client payment comes through, love, he'd said, his hand warm on my cheek, his eyes earnest. It was a significant sum, enough to make my savings account wince. I trusted him. He was an architect, he was successful, it was just a temporary hiccup. The money, of course, never came back directly. It was always paid back in vague gestures, like him covering a particularly expensive dinner or buying me a designer bag I'd admired. He never explicitly said, "This is me paying you back." It was just folded into the narrative of him being generous and successful, subtly blurring the lines. The financial ambiguity became a recurring theme. His phone would ring with calls he'd take in hushed tones, away from me. He'd get agitated about bank statements, then quickly dismiss it as boring business stuff. He never explicitly asked me for money again after that first time, but he fostered an environment where I often found myself footing the bill for things, or picking up the slack, always under the guise of our shared future or we're a team. My once robust savings began to dwindle, slowly but surely, eroded by these invisible expenses and his elusive repayments. My logical brain, the one that tracked every penny for work projects, felt a vague, persistent alarm. But my emotional brain, steeped in the intoxicating potion of his love and promises, kept hitting the snooze button. It was just a phase, I reasoned. Once his big project landed, everything would stabilize. We'd be set. He was worth the risk. He was our future. The gaslighting, when I finally recognized it for what it was, felt like a slow-acting poison, dulling my perceptions, making me question the very ground beneath my feet. It started small, with forgotten conversations. "But Mark, you said you'd pick up the dry cleaning," I'd say, holding up his wrinkled shirt. Did I? No, Lila, I don't think I did. You must be mistaken. You sometimes confuse things, you know? His voice would be gentle, concerned, almost pitying. And I'd second-guess myself. Had I really said that? Was my memory failing? Soon, it escalated. If I expressed a feeling he didn't like, he'd reframe it. "You're not angry, Lila, you're just tired. You tend to get emotional when you're tired." Or, if I challenged him on an inconsistency in his stories, "That's not what happened at all. You're twisting my words. You always make things into a bigger drama than they are." He was a master of the bewildered, slightly disappointed expression, making me feel as though I was the irrational one, I was the problem. I began to doubt my own reality. My once sharp, analytical mind, honed by years in digital strategy, felt foggy, unreliable. I found myself apologizing constantly, for things I wasn't even sure I'd done, just to smooth over the ripples he seemed to effortlessly create. He even turned my best qualities against me. My empathy became oversensitivity. My passion became drama. My independence became stubbornness. He chipped away at my self-worth, making me believe that my natural reactions were flaws, that my perceptions were skewed. "You're being paranoid, Lila," he'd say with a soft laugh. When I voiced a concern about his frequent late nights or vague excuses. "You need to relax. Don't let your imagination run wild." He made me feel crazy for simply observing. I started checking my phone logs, replaying conversations in my head, just to confirm what I remembered. But even then, his conviction, his calm denial, was so powerful that I'd often surrender, convinced that somehow, my memory had played a trick on me. The worst part was that he presented it all as concern. "I just worry about you, my love," he'd murmur, pulling me into a hug. "You get so worked up. I just want you to be happy." And because I loved him, because I craved his approval and believed in his sincerity, I accepted his version of reality. My inner voice, the one that used to scream at injustice, grew faint, almost inaudible. I was walking on eggshells in my own mind, terrified of saying or doing something that would trigger his gentle disappointment or his exasperated sighs. My world became a small, tightly controlled space, where every thought and feeling had to be vetted through the lens of what Mark would deem acceptable. The vibrant colors of my life had not just muted, they were starting to bleed into an indistinguishable gray, and I, the artist of my own existence, was losing the ability to distinguish one from another. The knot in my stomach became a permanent resident, tightening with every new day. It was a dull, persistent ache that hummed beneath the surface of my forced cheerfulness. I'd wake up feeling it, a vague sense of dread, and it would accompany me through my day, a constant reminder that something was deeply wrong. My friends, especially Sarah, were becoming more direct in their concern. "Lila," Sarah said one evening, pulling me aside at a casual happy hour, her voice low and serious. "You've changed. You're so quiet. And you seem sad." I tried to laugh it off. "No, I'm just tired. Work's been crazy." But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they sounded hollow. "And Mark," she continued, ignoring my feeble deflection. He seems to take up all the air in the room when he's with you. And he talks over you, all the time." I felt a familiar flicker of defensiveness, but this time it was weaker. Because she was right. He did. He talked over me, finished my sentences, corrected my stories. And I had started shrinking, my voice becoming softer, my opinions less frequent. I'd started to avoid bringing him to social gatherings, not because I was ashamed of him, but because I was ashamed of how I acted around him, how small I became. My colleagues, too, seemed to notice. The sharp, confident Lila who led brainstorming sessions and commanded respect was slowly being replaced by a hesitant, distracted version. My boss, usually so effusive with praise, started giving me subtly critical feedback. "You seem a little unfocused, Lila," she'd say. "Everything okay?" Everything was not okay. My performance at work, once a source of pride, started to slip. I missed deadlines, made careless mistakes, and my creativity felt stifled, suffocated. The stress was palpable, a constant pressure building in my chest. I considered therapy, briefly, but then Mark would do something sweet, cook my favorite meal, buy me flowers, tell me how much he loved me, and the thought would vanish, replaced by the desperate hope that this was the turning point, that we were back to the magic. I was living in a perpetual state of emotional whiplash, oscillating between moments of love and genuine connection, and deep, crushing doubt. The highs were intoxicating, almost addictive, making me forget the lows. The lows, however, were becoming more frequent, more profound. My apartment, once my sanctuary, began to feel like a cage. His presence was everywhere, not just in his belongings, but in the lingering tension, the unspoken rules, the constant need to adjust myself to his mercurial moods. I started having vivid dreams, restless and unsettling, where I was trying to run but my legs wouldn't move, where I was screaming but no sound came out. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the knot in my stomach tighter than ever. I was losing touch with myself, with who I was before him. The realization wasn't a sudden flash, but a slow, creeping dawn, revealing the shadows for what they were. I was unhappy. Profoundly, deeply unhappy. And the source of that unhappiness, the one I had refused to name, was staring me in the face every morning when I woke up next to him. The illusion began to truly crack, not with a dramatic bang, but with the quiet, devastating click of an email notification. Mark had been working late, or so he said, on a secret project for a new client. He'd been particularly vague about the details, which, by this point, was a familiar pattern. I was in the living room, scrolling mindlessly through Instagram, when his laptop, left open on the coffee table, blinked with an incoming message. It wasn't an email from a client. It was from a small, local art gallery, an invoice for a large, expensive painting. A painting that I had never seen, never heard him mention, and certainly didn't belong to any client. My heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This wasn't a temporary cash flow issue. This wasn't about stifled creativity. This was a lie. A calculated deception, and an expensive one at that. He'd been telling me for weeks that he was tight on funds, which was why I'd picked up the tab for our last few dinners, why I'd paid the entire deposit for our upcoming weekend getaway. He'd even hinted that I might need to cover the remaining balance for the trip, just until this big deal closes. The painting was a beautiful, abstract piece, far too modern for his apartment, which leaned more towards minimalist. A cold dread seeped into my bones. Who was this for? And why was he lying about being broke while spending lavishly on art? When he finally came home, smelling faintly of stale cigarette smoke and something sweet, like perfume, I confronted him, the laptop screen still displaying the incriminating invoice. "Mark," I began, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "What is this?" His eyes scanned the screen, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of panic, a raw, naked fear, before his usual mask of calm snapped back into place. "Oh, that," he said, too casually, waving a dismissive hand. "That's nothing, babe. Just a gift for my sister. Her birthday's coming up, and she's been wanting a piece from that artist." He picked up the laptop, closing it with a definitive snap. "It's a surprise, that's why I didn't tell you. You know how she is, she'd ruin it." My sister. He only had one, a distant, aloof woman I'd met once, who had shown no interest in art whatsoever. The story was flimsy, transparent, and insulting. "Your sister?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Mark, you told me you were struggling. You let me pay for everything, you let me worry. And you're buying expensive art as a surprise?" He sighed, a long-suffering sound that immediately put me on the defensive. "Lila, why are you always so dramatic? It's a small painting. And it's for family. Are you really going to make a fuss about this? I just wanted to do something nice." He turned his back on me, walking into the kitchen to grab a drink. His evasion, his immediate shift to making me the unreasonable one, was sickeningly familiar. I stood there, rooted to the spot, the truth a bitter taste in my mouth. He was lying. And I was tired of pretending I didn't see it. This wasn't just about money or a painting. This was about a fundamental dishonesty, a calculated concealment that chipped away at the foundation of everything I thought we had. The pain wasn't just in the lie itself, but in the casual way he dismissed my feelings, my concern, turning it back on me as irrationality. The knot in my stomach twisted tighter, a churning sea of doubt and disillusionment. I didn't believe him. Not one word. And that realization, stark and chilling, was worse than any anger. After the painting incident, the veneer of our perfect relationship began to peel away, revealing the rot beneath. Every glance, every word, every subtle gesture from Mark now felt tainted, viewed through the lens of my newfound skepticism. His charm, which had once been so intoxicating, now felt like a performance, a carefully constructed facade designed to keep me docile. I started to notice how he would subtly redirect conversations away from his work or his past, how his stories would sometimes contradict each other, tiny inconsistencies that I had previously dismissed as harmless forgetfulness. He spent more and more time working late, and his explanations became increasingly vague and convoluted. "Big pitch in the suburbs," he'd say, or "client meeting running over, crucial details." My mind, which he had so effectively gaslit into doubting itself, was slowly reasserting its logic. I wasn't paranoid, I was observant. I wasn't overthinking, I was connecting the dots. The emotional manipulation, the subtle isolation, the financial ambiguity, they all coalesced into a single, terrifying truth: Mark was not who he pretended to be. He was a master illusionist, and I had been his most willing audience. Our tender moments, once so comforting, now felt hollow. When he'd pull me close and whisper sweet nothings, I felt a cold detachment, an analytical part of my brain dissecting his words, searching for the hidden agenda. The laughter didn't reach my eyes anymore. I felt trapped in a gilded cage, the bars of his deception closing in around me. I spent hours alone in my apartment, even when he was home, scrolling through old photos of us, trying to pinpoint the exact moment the magic died, the precise instant the cracks began to show. Was it the first dismissive comment? The subtle undermining at Sarah's party? The way he'd always made me feel like I was the dramatic one? It wasn't a single event, but a slow, steady erosion, like water wearing away stone. I felt a profound sense of grief, not just for the relationship, but for the person I had become within it. I had allowed myself to be molded, diminished, and silenced. The vibrant, independent Lila had gone into hiding, replaced by a ghost of herself, afraid to speak, afraid to feel, afraid to even acknowledge the truth that screamed in her soul. I tried to talk to him, to genuinely communicate, to salvage what I still hoped might be real. "Mark," I said one morning over coffee, my voice barely a whisper, "I feel like we're drifting apart. I feel like you're not telling me everything." He looked up from his phone, his expression a mixture of feigned confusion and practiced weariness. "Lila, again? What are you even talking about? We're fine. You're imagining things. You know you sometimes get these phases. Just stress from work, probably. You need to relax." He reached across the table, taking my hand, his touch, once so comforting, now feeling utterly foreign. "Let's just enjoy our coffee. We're good, my love. We're us." And the cycle continued. His denial, my confusion, his charming reassurance, my temporary surrender. But each time, the surrender was harder, the belief weaker, the pain sharper. The illusion was crumbling, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it couldn't last much longer. The coming storm felt inevitable, a terrifying but necessary force to finally shatter the false reality he had so carefully constructed. The quiet ache in my stomach had grown into a roaring tempest, demanding release. The pressure built steadily, an unbearable weight on my chest. My 29th birthday was approaching, and Mark, with characteristic grandiosity, had insisted on throwing me a surprise party. "A big one," he'd said, "to celebrate you, my amazing Lila." The thought filled me with dread. A public spectacle. More performative happiness. I tried to suggest something smaller, a quiet dinner with just a few close friends, but he dismissed my ideas with a wave of his hand. "Nonsense. You deserve the best. I've already booked the private room at the Artisan, and sent out the invites. It's all taken care of." He beamed, clearly proud of his planning, oblivious to the panic tightening its grip around my throat. I felt like an actress preparing for a role I no longer wanted to play. The idea of standing there, smiling falsely, accepting compliments while my world crumbled internally, was excruciating. Sarah, sensing my distress, offered to help. "Just tell me what you need, Lils," she said, her eyes full of genuine concern. "We can pretend to be excited. But if you want to bail, I'll concoct the most believable excuse ever." I appreciated her offer, but deep down, a part of me knew this had to play out. The confrontation, the unraveling, felt necessary. It was like a wound that needed to be lanced, no matter how painful, to allow the healing to begin. I spent the days leading up to the party in a daze, going through the motions at work, mechanically responding to messages, my mind a chaotic swirl of anxiety and a strange, morbid curiosity about what would finally trigger the inevitable explosion. I tried to prepare myself for the worst, mentally rehearsing responses, imagining scenarios. But nothing could have prepared me for the actual, brutal reality. I bought a new dress, a vibrant emerald green that usually made me feel confident, but when I looked in the mirror, all I saw was a stranger, her eyes shadowed, her smile brittle. Mark, on the other hand, was in his element, buzzing with excitement, calling me his queen and talking endlessly about the big reveal. He clearly envisioned a grand, romantic scene, unaware that his carefully constructed house of cards was about to collapse, perhaps even literally, around him. I felt a perverse sense of calm in the hours before the party, a stillness that comes right before a storm. My breath was shallow, my hands clammy, but my mind was unusually clear. I knew, with every fiber of my being, that this night would be the turning point. Whatever happened, whatever truth emerged, there was no going back. The charade was over. I was tired of pretending. I was tired of being gaslit. I was tired of being small. And as I stepped into that dress, zipping it up with a trembling hand, I knew that a part of me, the real Lila, was about to make her return, even if it meant tearing everything apart to do so. The anticipation was a physical ache, a premonition of the seismic shift about to occur. The evening of my 29th birthday party dawned with a cruel, mocking brightness. I arrived at the Artisan, a trendy, minimalist restaurant that Mark had raved about, its private room filled with soft lighting and the murmur of anticipation. Friends, colleagues, even a few distant family members were there, all smiling, holding cocktails, ready to celebrate. Mark, looking impossibly handsome in a tailored suit, was playing the perfect host, greeting everyone with effusive warmth, his arm around my waist, his smile dazzling. I plastered on my own smile, a fragile mask, feeling like a puppet in my own life. The air was thick with polite chatter and the clinking of glasses. My stomach churned, a frantic ballet of nerves and impending doom. Then, about an hour into the party, as I was accepting another well-wisher's hug, a woman I vaguely recognized approached me. She was older, impeccably dressed, and had a sharp, knowing glint in her eyes. "Lila, isn't it?" she began, her voice a low murmur. "I'm Evelyn Vance. You probably don't remember me, but I met you at that gallery opening a few months ago." I nodded, a vague memory of a sophisticated woman in a red dress. "Of course," I lied politely. "Nice to see you again." She smiled, a little too sweetly. "I just wanted to say, I hope you enjoy your birthday. And the painting." My blood ran cold. The painting. The expensive, abstract piece that Mark had supposedly bought for his sister. "I'm sorry?" I managed, my voice barely a whisper. Evelyn's smile widened, a hint of genuine pity in her eyes now. "Oh, didn't Mark tell you? He commissioned it for you. Said it was a special surprise. He just picked it up last week." She gestured vaguely towards a corner of the room. "He even showed it to me when I was at his place on Monday, I think it was. It's stunning. Perfect for your apartment." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not for his sister. For me. And she'd seen it at his place, not our place, his place, on Monday, the night he was supposedly working late on a secret project. My mind raced, pieces clicking into place with a terrifying clarity. The late nights, the vague excuses, the perfume scent, the expensive painting. It wasn't for his sister. It wasn't for me either. It was for someone else. And the someone else had seen it at his place, the place he said he was at for work. My gaze shot across the room, finding Mark's eyes. He was laughing, completely oblivious, still holding court. Evelyn, perhaps sensing my sudden pallor, leaned in. "Well, enjoy," she said, before gracefully excelling herself into the crowd. My vision blurred. The room seemed to spin. I felt a roaring in my ears, a sound that drowned out the celebratory music, the clinking glasses, the happy chatter. The betrayal wasn't just in the infidelity, it was in the elaborate, callous deception, the gaslighting, the emotional and financial manipulation, all leading up to this moment where his carefully constructed lies collapsed around me, publicly, painfully. My eyes found his again. He was still smiling. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. The fear, the self-doubt, the lingering love, they all burned away, replaced by a searing, incandescent rage. I walked towards him, my legs moving on their own accord, a strange calm settling over me amidst the storm. He saw me approaching, his smile still in place, ready to greet me with a kiss, unaware of the inferno blazing in my eyes. "Lila, my love," he began, reaching for me. "Having fun, my queen?" I stopped a foot away from him, my voice, when it came, cutting through the ambient noise like a blade. "Don't my queen me, Mark." Every head in the room turned. The chatter died. The music seemed to mute. The entire room held its breath, sensing the shift. His smile faltered. "Lila? What's wrong?" "You're scaring people." "I'm scaring people?" I repeated, my voice rising, trembling with suppressed fury. "You want to know what's scaring people, Mark? The fact that you're a pathological liar. The fact that you've been sleeping with someone else, buying her expensive paintings, all while I've been paying your bills and believing your pathetic excuses." His face went white. He opened his mouth, then closed it, utterly speechless. Sarah was already by my side, her hand on my arm, her eyes wide with alarm and understanding. "Lila," she whispered, "let's go." But I shook her off. "Not yet. Not before I tore down every lie. This isn't a surprise party for me, is it, Mark?" I continued, my voice raw with emotion, tears finally streaming down my face. "It's a party for your ego. While you're living a double life, taking my money, making me think I'm crazy. And you even left the damn invoice for the painting you bought for her on your laptop. The painting that was for your sister, the painting that was seen at your place on Monday, the night you were working late." The silence in the room was deafening. Every eye was on us. Mark stood frozen, his perfect facade shattered, revealing the pathetic, cornered man beneath. "Lila, stop it," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You're embarrassing yourself." "Embarrassing myself?" I laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "You think I can be more embarrassed than I've been for the past year, living with your lies, your gaslighting, your manipulation? No, Mark. You're the one who's exposed. You're the one who should be embarrassed." I looked around the room, meeting the shocked, sympathetic gazes of my friends, the stunned expressions of Mark's acquaintances. "This isn't my party anymore," I declared, my voice ringing with a newfound clarity, despite the tears. "This is your performance, Mark. And I'm done watching." I turned on my heel, a singular focus in my mind, "Get out." Sarah was right behind me, pulling me along, her grip firm and comforting. As I walked away, I heard the beginnings of murmurs, confused whispers, but I didn't look back. The taste of betrayal was acrid in my mouth, but beneath it, a strange, exhilarating sense of liberation began to bubble up. The cage had broken open. The immediate aftermath was a blur of raw emotion and the kindness of true friends. Sarah, my rock, ushered me out of the restaurant, shielding me from the lingering stares, her arm wrapped tightly around my shaking shoulders. We didn't say a word until we were safely in her car, speeding away from the wreckage of my birthday celebration. The silence was punctuated only by my ragged breaths and the occasional choked sob. When we finally pulled up to her apartment, she didn't ask questions, didn't offer platitudes. She simply held me as I dissolved, the carefully constructed dam of my composure finally breaking, releasing a torrent of tears, anger, and humiliation. I cried until my eyes were swollen shut and my throat was raw. I told her everything, the years of subtle manipulation, the gaslighting, the financial ambiguity, the erosion of my self-worth, and finally, the agonizing revelation of his double life. She listened patiently, occasionally squeezing my hand, her presence a silent, unwavering comfort. "Oh, Lila," she whispered, her voice laced with pain. I knew something was off. I didn't know how bad it was. That night, I slept on her sofa, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of her familiar fabric softener, the scent of safety. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mark's shocked, exposed face, then the judgmental stares of the party guests, then the knowing, pitying look of Evelyn Vance. The humiliation was a burning brand on my skin. I woke up the next morning feeling hollowed out, but strangely, a little lighter. The storm had broken, and I was still standing. The first thing I did was call my landlord and inform them that Mark would be moving out immediately. I didn't care about the logistics, the lease, anything. He wasn't allowed back in my sanctuary. Then, with Sarah by my side, providing moral support and a much-needed box of tissues, I packed his belongings. It was a brutal, cathartic process. Each shirt, each book, each toothbrush felt like a piece of the lie, a relic of the false reality he had created. I threw them into boxes with a fierce, almost violent energy, fueled by a rage I hadn't known I possessed. Sarah quietly gathered the things I'd bought him, a watch, a set of cufflinks, a vintage record player, and placed them in a separate pile. "What do you want to do with these?" she asked gently. "Burn them," I said, without hesitation. We compromised and decided to donate them. I blocked him on every social media platform, on my phone, on email. The digital cords that tied us together were severed, one by one. The silence that followed was deafening, but it was my silence, and for the first time in a long time, it felt empowering. He tried to call from an unknown number, tried to reach me through mutual friends. Sarah, ever vigilant, intercepted all of it. "She's not talking to you, Mark," I heard her say firmly into the phone one afternoon. "She's done." And for the first time, hearing those words spoken by someone else, I realized it was true. I was done. The immediate pain was immense, a gaping wound, but beneath it, a tiny seed of defiance, of self-preservation, had begun to sprout. The public unraveling had been brutal, but it had also been liberating. There was no more hiding, no more pretending. The truth, ugly as it was out in the open, and now I could begin to breathe. The days that followed were a descent into a kind of emotional purgatory. The initial shock wore off, replaced by a suffocating wave of grief, anger, and an overwhelming sense of foolishness. I spent hours replaying every interaction, every conversation, every subtle cue I had missed. The gaslighting, once a fuzzy concept, now stood in stark, horrifying clarity. Every time he'd told me I was overthinking, too emotional, or imagining things, it wasn't just dismissiveness, it was a deliberate attempt to undermine my sanity, to make me doubt my own perceptions. The layers of deception peeled back, revealing a hollow core. He wasn't just a liar, he was a master manipulator, a chameleon who had adapted his persona perfectly to ensnare me. The painting wasn't just a lie, it was a symbol of his casual cruelty, his willingness to use and discard me while maintaining an air of benevolent concern. I mourned not just the loss of the relationship, but the loss of the person I thought Mark was. The charming, witty, attentive man I had fallen in love with had never truly existed. He was a mirage, a carefully constructed illusion, and I had invested my heart, my time, my energy, and my money into a ghost. The anger was a fiery beast, consuming me. Anger at him, for his callousness. Anger at myself, for being so blind, so naive, so willing to believe. How could I have been so stupid? So easily manipulated? These questions tormented me, echoing endlessly in the quiet of my apartment, which now felt vast and empty without his oppressive presence. Sarah was a constant lifeline. She brought me food, watched terrible rom-coms with me, and simply sat in silence when I couldn't bring myself to speak. She validated my feelings, reminding me that I wasn't stupid, that narcissists and manipulators were masters of their craft, and that anyone could fall prey to their tactics. Her unwavering support was a beacon in the darkness. I started therapy a week after the party. My therapist, a kind, pragmatic woman named Dr. Evans, helped me navigate the chaotic landscape of my emotions. She didn't let me wallow, but she also didn't rush me. She gave me tools to recognize the patterns of gaslighting, to rebuild my self-trust, and to process the complex trauma of betrayal. She explained that the shame I felt was a common reaction for victims of emotional manipulation, and that healing began with self-compassion. Slowly, painfully, the shame began to recede, replaced by a growing sense of clarity. The blame shifted from myself to where it truly belonged, on Mark. He was the one who had chosen to lie, to manipulate, to betray. I was the one who had simply loved, openly and honestly. The realization was a pivotal moment. It wasn't my fault. It was never my fault. This truth, simple yet profound, began to chip away at the heavy burden I had been carrying. The descent was difficult, agonizing even, but it was also a necessary journey through the wreckage, picking through the debris of my shattered illusions, to find the pieces of myself that still remained. And I knew, with a quiet certainty, that I would eventually put them back together, stronger and more resilient than before. The rebuilding process was not linear. Some days, I felt a surge of defiant energy, ready to conquer the world. Other days, I could barely drag myself out of bed, overwhelmed by a fresh wave of grief or a sudden, sharp memory of a lie. But even on the worst days, there was a subtle shift. I was no longer dwelling in the depths of self-blame. I was beginning to reclaim myself, one painful step at a time. The first step was reclaiming my space. My apartment, once filled with his presence, needed to feel like mine again. I rearranged furniture, purged anything that reminded me of him, and filled the empty spaces with things that brought me joy: new plants, vibrant art prints, and a ridiculously expensive, but deeply comforting, weighted blanket. I started hosting small, intimate gatherings with my closest friends again, reconnecting with the people I had inadvertently distanced myself from. Their laughter and genuine affection were a soothing balm for my wounded soul. I allowed myself to be vulnerable, to share the messy, ugly parts of my healing journey, and in doing so, I discovered a depth of love and support I had forgotten existed. My work, which had suffered so much during the height of the Mark-induced chaos, slowly began to improve. Dr. Evans had encouraged me to focus on things that gave me a sense of accomplishment and control. I channeled my renewed focus into a particularly challenging project at the agency, pouring all my energy into it. The satisfaction of a successful presentation, of seeing my ideas come to fruition, was a powerful antidote to the helplessness I had felt for so long. It reminded me of my capabilities, my intelligence, my worth, independent of any external validation. I rediscovered old hobbies I had abandoned, painting, which allowed me to express the swirling emotions I couldn't articulate, and hiking, which reconnected me with the simple, grounding beauty of nature. Each brushstroke, each step on the trail, was a small act of rebellion, a reclaiming of my time, my energy, my joy. I started journaling, filling page after page with my raw thoughts and feelings. It was a space where I could be brutally honest with myself, where I could rage without judgment, where I could acknowledge the pain without letting it consume me. Through the journaling, I began to identify the patterns of emotional manipulation, not just in Mark, but in past relationships and even in subtle dynamics with family members. This newfound awareness was empowering, a shield against future deception. The healing wasn't about forgetting or forgiving him, it was about forgiving myself for falling for his lies, and about remembering who Lila was before he tried to erase her. It was about rebuilding trust, not in others, but in my own instincts, my own voice, my own sense of reality. The journey was long and arduous, but with each passing day, I felt a little stronger, a little clearer, a little more like the woman I was meant to be. The scars remained, a testament to the battle I had fought, but they were no longer gaping wounds. They were fading, becoming whispers of a past that had nearly broken me. but ultimately made me unbreakable. Months passed. The initial raw pain morphed into a dull ache, then a persistent phantom limb sensation, and finally, a quiet, almost imperceptible scar. There was no grand, final confrontation with Mark. He made a few half-hearted attempts to contact me in the immediate aftermath, a mixture of apologies and continued gaslighting. "You overreacted, Lila. I miss you. This is all a misunderstanding. Can't we just talk?" But Sarah and I formed an impenetrable shield. I never responded. I didn't need to. His words held no power over me anymore. The silence I had imposed was my ultimate, most powerful goodbye. The emotional closure came not from a dramatic monologue or a climactic confrontation, but from within. It was a gradual dawning, a quiet realization that I was truly, irrevocably, done. Done with the lies, done with the manipulation, done with the constant anxiety and self-doubt. The anger dissipated, replaced by a sense of profound indifference. He was just a chapter, a painful but ultimately instructive one, in the vast narrative of my life. He no longer occupied prime real estate in my mind. My apartment, once a silent witness to my pain, had transformed into a vibrant reflection of my renewed spirit. I painted one wall a deep teal, a bold color I never would have chosen before, and filled it with artwork I had created, messy and imperfect, but uniquely mine. My yoga practice became a sacred ritual, a time to reconnect with my body and quiet my mind. I started running again, feeling the exhilaration of my legs carrying me forward, each step a testament to my resilience. My career thrived. I pitched and won a major new client, leading the project with a confidence that had been dormant for too long. My boss noticed, and I received a promotion I had been working towards for years. The financial independence I had always valued now felt even more precious, a symbol of my autonomy. I was dating again, casually at first. There was no rush, no desperate need to fill a void. I approached new connections with caution, but also with an open heart, empowered by my newfound ability to recognize red flags and assert my boundaries. I prioritized friendships, cherishing the authentic connections I had, the people who loved me for who I truly was, flaws and all. I found joy in the small things, the first sip of hot coffee on a crisp morning, the comforting weight of my cat curled on my lap, the easy laughter shared with Sarah over bad jokes. Life wasn't perfect, of course. There were still moments of vulnerability, occasional pangs of sadness for the dreams that had been shattered. But they were fleeting, quickly overshadowed by a profound sense of peace and gratitude. I was stronger, wiser, and more authentically myself than I had ever been. The wound had healed, leaving behind a scar that served not as a reminder of pain, but of my capacity for resilience, for growth, for choosing myself. I was free. Free from his lies, free from his control, free to write the next, unwritten chapters of my life, chapters filled with my own truth, my own desires, my own unapologetic joy. And that, I realized, was the greatest emotional payoff of all.